Hey, Grandmasters, Mike from the WCA with the Week 6 update from our Winter 2014 session. I want to share with you a game we looked at in the 4 o'clock class. It happens to be one of my own games that was played the week before against a friend of mine who's a 2400 player. And we talked about in the class what happens when you have a completely winning position and you're playing out in a tournament and you end up losing the game. And when you walk out of the room, usually it's more than one person that will come up to you and say, hey, how could you possibly lose that position? And in the written portion of our update this week, we even wrote about it in the article, saying that you are going to experience this. While you're in the game, usually because of time pressure, you end up making mistakes. And it's going to happen to you. So I wanted to prepare the students for when it does happen to them, what to do. And one thing I talk to them about is to be very careful about reacting so quickly to what people say, because it's normal. They can see you playing, and they know that you have a winning position. But remember that they're calm. They're not in the game, so it's usually easier for them to find moves. When you're in the game and you're running out of time, and you also kind of you're fighting this feeling of, oh man, I definitely have this stronger opponent beat, I should be able to win. When you start thinking that way, you tend to make mistakes. I mean, between those thoughts and the clock, it's very common for players to mess up. So when you leave the room, you're kind of embarrassed. It's like, oh man, I know I should have won. But we wanted to prepare the students to expect people to come to them and say, wow, how could you possibly lose that position? And I don't want you guys to think that you did something really wrong or that you're a terrible chess player. No, no, no. It is going to happen to everyone. So let me just show you what happened to me the week before this class was taking place. Okay, so I have black against my friend Leaf, who's a 2400, really, really strong chess player. And he happens to be really good in time pressure, and I happen to be really bad in time pressure. So that combination really led to my downfall here. But let me show you how the game went from here. Okay, so I have black. And Leaf is just castled queenside, and you'll see here, I'll show you with the mouse cursor today, that my bishop is being attacked. So we end up making the trade. We're giving up the two bishops, but we have a reason. He takes back with the bishop, and we tuck our queen in on c7. So even though white now has these two bishops, the fact that this pawn is on d4 and can't advance so easily right now means that this bishop is not going to be so active. He could try to move it to this diagonal at some point to cover these squares, but, you know, black is okay in this position. Nothing great, but okay. The key difference between our positions, though, is the fact that black has not castled the king yet. So any good chess player knows that if you have the two bishops, like Leaf has here, and you see your opponent's king in the middle, that's kind of a recipe for opening up the board. White would love to open up this game so that both bishops can come to life and try to take advantage of my king being in the middle. So he comes up with this nice combination. He plays the move g4, which forces my bishop back to g6. He makes the trade, and clearly you guys should all see you have to take with the h-pawn here. You can't take this way because the queen will just pick off this pawn with check and your structure would be really, really bad. So black takes back, and then he continues with his idea, and he plays pawn to d5. Now that's a pawn sacrifice, but there's a concrete reason behind it. Again, he's trying to open up some lines, and he wants to take advantage of the fact that his queen is still pointing at my king. So we accept the sacrifice, and then he plays this move g5, and that takes away the defense of this pawn, or at least one of the defenders, because you have to remember this pawn here is technically not guarding this pawn right now because it's pinned. So whenever you have a pinned piece, remember that it can't really do what it's supposed to be doing. If it's supposed to guard that pawn, that's great, but if it's pinned, remember it's not really guarding the pawn. Okay, so now what to do with this knight? So we play the move knight h5. And by playing knight h5, we're really keeping an eye on this diagonal here because that bishop was attacking our pawn on g7. and at the same time the knight is kind of tucked away and it's safe for now. Okay, white plays king b1. And the reason he played king b1 is he wanted to get off of this diagonal, which may have run into some queen check at some point on this square. All right, so black castles, and white decides to put a knight in my position. Now, these knights are not pleasant to deal with when they're close to your position. You have to start watching out for sacrifices. You know, for example, maybe the knight could take this pawn when you take back, then the queen takes here, check. And there are sometimes some issues in positions like this tactically, so it's usually a good idea to get rid of those pieces. Now, this was a game 45, so at this point, I was already down. I don't have the times in front of me, but I was already a little bit behind on the clock because of the opening. It was a little tricky, and you don't really have forever to think. In a slow game, you would spend much, much more time before deciding to make this trade. However, I did make the trade, and I was following one of the WCA rules that we teach, is that you never make a fair trade unless you think the trade helps your position. So I just wanted to get that knight basically out of my position. That was the main reason I made the trade. He took with the bishop. He's not going to trade queens here because he's down a pawn and he wants to attack. And then I moved the queen to c6, just keeping her on a light square. And now he plays rook h to e1. In some lines, he was thinking of moving this pawn here up to the f4 square and maybe trying to break in some more lines. But there would have been a knight fork. This knight here on h5 could hop into this square here, and that can be a problem. So let me put the rook back for a moment, and you can see that if the knight could land here safely, it would fork the queen and the rook. Right now it can't go in there because it's covered by the pawn and the bishop, but if that pawn were to move to f4, we might have a knight fork. So he basically centralizes his rook. Good move. And now you're playing black. Well, what to do? We're up a pawn. We could just sit here all day and wait for him to attack us, or we can get on with our own activity. And when you see the kings castled on opposite sides of the board, even our 12 and 2 o'clock students have learned one of the attacking tools that we have is called a pawn storm. And we take our pawns on this side of the board, so I'll highlight these guys for you, our B and A pawn, and we want to basically, if allowed, we want to throw these pawns up the board and think of them as like little stones or rocks, and we want to throw them into this wall that's protecting the white king up here. And if we're able to do that, we're going to open up some lines, and opening the lines, hopefully our two rooks down here would be able to use them along with the queen to build an attack against the king. So played the move b5, and now Leaf comes up with a pretty cool idea. He's a very aggressive player, and he finds concrete ideas in games very quickly. Now, what do I mean by concrete? He has something that he wants to do that's pretty much going to force me to react to him, and because his move or his idea is about 4 moves deep, he gets to save a lot of time on the clock. Now, it turns out his idea really wasn't that great, but because he was able to play it quickly and get a couple of pieces attacking my king, it turned out to be a very good practical idea. And what I mean by practical is, over the board in a live game, it's really an advantage if you can play moves that save time and also have ideas behind them. In slow chess, you have to be very careful because your opponent has a lot of time on the clock to figure out what you're doing. So if it turns out what you're doing is not great, you could easily lose. But in fast chess, games, 60 minutes or less per player, they call that action chess sometimes, you have to be very, very careful about how you manage your time. Okay, so here's his plan. He wants to lift this rook here, and I'm going to show you with some arrows. He wants to move it to d4, then he's going to slide it over to h4. He's going to take this knight, and that's called an exchange sacrifice because he is giving up a rook for a knight, right? And then his queen is going to come up here and take that pawn that's going to take back on h5. And I'll show you in a moment what that's going to look like. All right, so that's his plan. So after I played b5, sure enough, here's step one. He lifts his rook. Well, what's black going to do? Remember what I told you before, we're going to attack the white king. We can't just sit here. So we play the move a5. Now, as soon as he swings the rook over to h4, I kind of saw that coming, but I had to start spending some time calculating his threats. And I realized that I had time to push this pawn, and now Leaf very, very quickly goes into action. He takes my knight, I take back, and he takes here. And now the problem with a player of my rating is I have to deal with, I kind of say that in this position, or at least I felt in the game, that he had 2.5 pieces attacking my king. And I know that sounds a little strange, guys, but let me show you with some highlights what I'm talking about. Clearly the queen is one piece I'm concerned with, right? I mean, you know all about her. Clearly the bishop is pointing in the direction of the king. So that's 2 major pieces, or 2, power pieces attacking me. So where's the half coming from? Because I did say 2.5. And that's this guy here, this pawn on g5. When a pawn gets close to the enemy king, that pawn's value goes way up. If it gets to the 6th rank, as it will in some variations here, I always say that a pawn on the 6th rank near the enemy king, if it's supported by pieces, has the value of a piece itself, like a knight or a bishop. So I'm really getting concerned with, the storm brewing over my king's head. So the problem again is I'm getting old, man. So, Leaf is, I don't know, 20, 25 years younger than me. And when you're playing a younger person who's really fast with the clock, and I know these ideas are coming, I have to spend a lot of time to make sure I just don't get mated in a couple of moves. So when he snaps off the pawn, my clock is ticking away, and that's really not good. Okay, so I see his threats. I know that he's going to be attacking my king. So again, we have the choice, sit back or counterattack. So I played rook f to c8, and my idea is to just grab that pawn up there with check, which is a pretty good, defense in this position. He plays the move c3, and he's just trying to close things up, but it turns out not to be the strongest move in the position, because he's kind of breaking a rule here, and that's called, moving pawns in front of your king when it's being attacked. And I almost jumped and started to take pawns off the board, and then I saw a pretty cool idea, and I played the move queen c4. And the idea of queen c4 is to threaten to come into this square at some point, possibly give a check. Sorry, let's straighten that arrow out here. And then at the same time, you have the ability to come back on this diagonal and maybe get the queens off the board. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, we're up in exchange. Remember, he gave up a rook for a knight on the other side of the board, right? So when the queen came to c4, he decided to kind of support that structure with his king, but white is already getting in trouble now. So we take a pawn right in front of the king. Now we're threatening discovered checks, all sorts of things. The bishop really can't take here because it would walk right into a pin, and we could just move the pawn up and trap it. So he plays the move b3. So his idea was to sacrifice a pawn and then kick the queen away, but it's going to get him in big trouble. Queen c5 starts to hit undefended pawns. He defends the pawn here with the move rook e2, and now what to do? I'll be very honest with you, and I was telling the students in the class, I knew that I had a win in this position. I just absolutely knew that black should be winning, and it turns out that black is winning here, but the problem is when you don't see something concrete over the board, and I'm getting down, I don't know, maybe I had 5 minutes left on the clock to play the whole game here, I still have to deal with these 3 pieces on this side of the board. And you always have to look at forcing moves. As Rusa tells the kids all the time in the class, what if he just takes the pawn here with the bishop and threatens a queen check and then lifts the rook up and over? There are all these little combinations here that we start to worry about. And we know that we're winning, but when we start to look at our opponent's threats, it costs a lot of time. So I came up with a good move, and I think it was one of the better moves in the position. I played d4. And by playing d4, the idea is to turn these two pawns into more than just pawns, is to really turn them into an attacking force, really, which they are. So Leaf, being a very experienced player, especially in fast time controls, he's not going to sit there and let me just push those pawns and get him. He creates a threat. And that is a major, major threat. As a matter of fact, he's threatening to mate me now. I spent time, and I made a mistake here. The move I played was d3 check, which is winning, and it's the correct move. But before making it, because now I'm probably down to 4 minutes or so on the clock, I started to calculate other lines. And again, guys, if you're playing in slow chess time controls, you have the luxury of being able to do these types of things. Over the board, when you're down to 4 minutes, you have to play active moves that you see accomplish something that saves time on the clock. It's kind of not the kind of chess we want our students playing all the time because you're not thinking so deeply. But at the same time, we're trying to win tournament games. This is, this is not an exhibition. This is not a game for fun. It's a rated chess game. So you're really trying to win the game too here. I almost took this pawn on a3, which looks crushing, and it would be crushing except for the fact that white has a forced checkmate here. Okay, and unfortunately I saw it. I'd like you guys to stop the video and see if you can find the mate. Okay, so the mate is queen h7 check, and it doesn't matter here, king f8. After this check, and remember I told you you're being attacked by 3 pieces. Don't forget this pawn. It's now on the 6th rank. Yep, supported by 2 other pieces. This is a piece right here. So your king is being attacked by 3 pieces. He has no defenders, so we're in big trouble. It doesn't matter where you put your king on e7 or e8. It's the same outcome. So let's just say king e8. Then you get hit with queen f7 check. King d8, your only move. And hopefully you see this little combination. Bishop f6 check. Queen e7. And ouch. Checkmate. Not good. So the good news is I saw that. The bad news is it took way too much time to find out that taking this pawn here on a3 with my queen was not good. So I end up playing the right move, which is d3, which exposes his king. He definitely doesn't want to go to the back rank. I'll just show you a sample line, what happens. For example, if he goes to c1, you just take the pawn here on a3, and whatever he does, he's going to get mated. Like king b1, you just check on c2, and it's bad news. If rook takes, this is kind of cool. You can just take the rook with a pawn, and that's mate. Another thing, he could have gone here to a b1 on a light square, and that sets a little bit of a trap. I'll show you. You can play c2 check. Now, let's say the king goes to a2, and maybe you're part of the 12 or 2 o'clock class, and you're on your way up to playing at this level, and you think, oh, cool, look at this, I can make another queen. Now that's great, but don't forget the same checkmating pattern is still hiding on the other side of the board. Check, king f8, same pattern, guys. Bad news. King over, check, king d8, and the same exact mating pattern. To me, this is actually funnier. Let me just go back, because black has 2 queens, and and you're still getting mated. You can give one away here, and that's the end of the game. All right, so anyway, after this move d3, he had to take, and then this is when the panic starts setting in. You look over at the clock, and you see now you have like a minute and a half on the clock, and you're just like, how could I possibly lose this? Well, if I had found the move queen b5, it's completely crushing, and you can go over this position if you'd like at home. There's really no way out of saving this bishop in some lines. There's all sorts of things that are here. Actually, I apologize for a moment. Let me go back. It's in this position where in the game I checked him with this rook here. So I'm sorry. When he took my pawn, I checked him with the rook. And he ended up moving his king up the board, and in time trouble, I just messed up and ended up losing this position. The winning position was from here. As soon as he takes my pawn, I should take his pawn first. And by doing this, that eliminates his mating threat for now. And the queen will take back. And it's funny, this was pointed out to me as soon as I left the room. You know, there was a bunch of people there watching this game on a screen because it was being broadcast on the internet. And a couple of them said, wow, you know, you were winning. And one of them was the dad of an ex-WCA student who was playing in another section. And the dad said to me, you know, if you had just taken on G6, you were completely winning. And then I said, no, because he's threatening mate on this square. And he just politely walked away. And again, that's that emotion coming out of you when you knew you were winning. But he was absolutely right. If I had taken the pawn and the queen takes here, it's true, he is threatening mate down here on this square. But what the dad was talking about in a move that I missed was just queen here, check. And that's really, really strong because the bishop is hanging, the rook is hanging, depending on where the king goes, and there's really no way out of this. So anyway, you know, you can take a look at this and fool around with the game and see if you could have found some improvements for me. But I hope you learned the lesson in this. Number one, that it's really normal and okay to lose games like this in this fashion. It is going to happen. Try to remember some of the tips to save time in games. If you're running short on the clock, you can't always find the perfect move. Just play a move that really, you know, seems to get something done, stops your opponent's threats without wasting too much time on the clock. And then the other thing is, don't forget the human side of all of this. When you come out of the room and somebody makes a comment to you like that, well, how could you lose? Try to remember where each of you just were. You were in the middle of battle, and your friends who were watching were very calmly playing chess with you without the fear of losing the game or losing rating points. So it's each of you have a very different perspective. And hopefully if you get a handle on this, it will help you going forward as a tournament player, because I promise you these kinds of things happen all the time, okay? So I hope you enjoyed the game. I wish I could say the same from my perspective, although I did. I learned a lot, but it would have been nice to win this game. All right, guys, we'll see you in class.